What is it about the murderous dictator as an operator that you admire?
How many years has he been in power? For example, we have to provide a new home every 2 minutes in this country just to deal with net migration. I've argued that our infrastructure is crumbling. I've argued that our health service can't cope.
I do want to kind of clear up figures. Where did you get every 2 minutes a new home is created for some...
He has said that this is now a matter of national security.
Nigel Farage with his customary inflammatory language there at a Reform UK press conference. He declined to stand for a seat, but we will have more on what Farage is saying. Now, an apology. Earlier today, we heard live from Nigel Farage speaking at that election event we just saw. And when we came away from his live speech, I used language to describe it, which didn't meet the BBC's editorial standards on impartiality. I'd like to apologise to Mr Farage and viewers for this.
There's still more than 3 weeks to go in the British general election. It's not inconceivable that he actually could be the top dog in the election running by the time we get to the 4th of July. Sections of the media are doing their best to promote that.
Right, so only a few weeks are left for the general elections, and BBC's obsession with Nigel Farage is gaining momentum. I mean, it has never made sense to me as to why the public broadcaster, the British public broadcaster funded by your money, my money, would give disproportionate coverage to a leader of a smaller party, a party whose poll credentials have not yet been tested. I mean, the BBC, in its defense, would tell you that, oh, it used to be a party called Brexit. Before that, it was UKIP, and they did fairly well in the European Parliament elections. So therefore, you know, based on the electoral performance and how the pollsters, the polling agencies are predicting, the poll percentage for this party, the BBC has decided to give Nigel Farage and his party, the coverage that they are giving. Now, it doesn't make sense to me. I will come back to that. Let's first discuss how Nigel Farage is getting and the kind of coverage Nigel Farage is getting on the BBC compared to the mainstream 3 biggest political parties in this country. I'm not even talking about George Galloway. I mean, George Galloway's party, poor chap, is not getting any coverage on the BBC at all. When you look at the coverage that Nigel Farage is getting. So Nigel Farage, you don't have to go that far. You don't have to go to the, the leaders' debate, leaders of 7 political parties appearing on the BBC. Remember Michal Hussain doing the debate? That was just one of the many appearances that Nigel Farage has made. I mean, you don't have to go that far. In the last few days, day before yesterday, he was a chief guest on Nikki Campbell's phone-in program on 5 Live for 1 hour. And that particular program was broadcast on radio and then televised as well.
What is it about the murderous dictator as an operator that you admire?
How many years has he been in power? You know, he's gone from prime minister to president. He's a clever political operator.
How many journalists?
He kills journalists. He kills journalists.
Okay.
I said he was. I don't like him as a human being in any way at all. You can recognise the fact that some people are good at what they do, even if they have evil intent.
Was Hitler good at what he did?
What, as a public speaker? What do you think? Clearly hypnotic in a very dangerous way.
And also the fact that you think we should sit down and talk to Putin. That's what Tobias Ellwood is making the point.
Okay, yes. Look, this war has been going on now for years. It is likely to go on for many, many more years. We're looking at something like 1 million casualties between the two sides.
They're fighting for their country.
They're fighting for their
They're
country.
patriotic.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't support Ukraine at all. Not for 1 minute. But at the end of the day, most wars end in negotiation. And I fear if we don't find some way of at least sitting down and talking, that we're going to finish up with a war that goes on for year after year.
But that would only ever involve Putin getting some of Ukraine territory.
I think the big difficulty would be Crimea, yes. And I understand that, Nicky, but I mean, is it a bad idea to get people to sit around a table and talk?
Okay, if you're a high level, if you had an influence in the Conservative Party, and you had a meeting with Zelensky, before we go to Julian Birmingham, give me in a line, what would you say to Zelensky?
I'd say to Zelensky, look, the West have been supporting you. They will go on supporting you. But the percentage of your young manhood that you're losing is so bad. Isn't it time we at least tried to have a negotiation? He couldn't say no.
Not just was he appearing on a BBC radio station, the content of his interview was being covered by almost every single news platforms of the corporation. Then on the same day, he was appearing on the flagship breakfast program on BBC One, which has millions of viewers. And he got the airtime for 19 minutes, close to 19 minutes. That's a lot. I mean, I've been a journalist and I've worked for the BBC. Giving a leader of a political party 19 minutes on a breakfast program is unprecedented.
For example, we have to provide a new home every 2 minutes in this country just to deal with net migration. I've argued that our infrastructure is crumbling. I've argued that our health service can't cope.
I do want to kind of clear up figures. Where did you get every 2 minutes a new home is created for a migrant?
A migrant a minute comes to Britain. A migrant a minute comes to Britain. In fact, it's actually more than that. In simple terms, a migrant a minute comes. We have never...
How many migrants are you saying come to Britain?
Well, 2.5 million have come to Britain over the course of the last 2 years. In fact, 1 in 30 people on the streets of Britain today has come in the last 2 years.
Now, that figure, I will say...
Which is extraordinary.
That figure, we have fact-checked that figure, and that figure takes a look at the people who are coming in and hasn't accounted for the people who have left.
A migrant a minute is net, but the gross figure is 2.5 million people.
1 in 30 is not net, is it?
And here's the thing. Half of those that have come aren't coming to work. They're coming as dependents.
Where did you get that figure?
52% that have come as dependents. We've even allowed 125,000
Who in the future could work, yeah? Children don't come over here and not work, do they?
This is making us poorer. It's very interesting. Everyone says we need net migration for GDP, the size of the national cake. Actually, GDP per capita, per person, has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters. A massive influx of unskilled labour has driven down productivity, but intolerable pressure.
Productivity was an issue long time before migration became a political issue.
And it's getting worse. So look, all I'm arguing is common sense. We're living through a population explosion. We can't cope. It's making us poorer, and our living standards are declining as a result of it. And by the way, I'm all for people coming into Britain and British people working abroad. I'm all for it. But the scale on which this is happening is appalling.
I hope that George Galloway and other leaders of other political parties would hold BBC to account by using this video.
We appreciate your time this morning. We will be speaking to all the party leaders. All have been invited to join us on the sofa here. Nigel Farage, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Because here the presenter is saying that they will invite every leader of every political party. They're not saying the biggest political party. They're saying every political party. So that should also include George Galloway. Or George Galloway is not included because he has taken anti-Israel stance. And Nigel Farage is the darling because Nigel Farage has been indulging in Islamophobic trope. And he hasn't apologized for his Islamophobia that he unleashed on Sky News. You can see the program. You can see the video that I had made. He has not apologized for that racist comments. And yet BBC appears to be absolutely obsessed. Now the argument the BBC makes that, okay, his political party in different avatar has done fairly well in the past, i.e. UKIP, United Kingdom Independence Party, had done fairly well in the European Parliament elections. And it also performed not that well, but it also performed as Brexit party in the last elections. Now, in the last elections, the Brexit party had polled just 2% of votes. Just 2% of votes. The percentage of votes that UKIP got should not have any bearing on the general elections because the issues and the agenda of a European Parliament elections are absolutely different than the agenda and issues that matter for the general elections. Now, a party that got only 2% votes in the last general elections is being treated at par with the other 6 political parties. Is that fair? Do you agree with the BBC's justification? And BBC, by the way, this became a bone of contention and BBC received lots of complaints from the viewers. So BBC was forced to issue a clarification. In its clarification, astonishingly, BBC says that they have decided to give the unprecedented coverage to Nigel Farage based on how his party is being predicted to get votes in different poll surveys by pollsters, including YouGov. YouGov being the main polling agency whose surveys are being covered or taken on board or seriously by almost every media outlet. Do you know who co-founded YouGov? YouGov was co-founded by somebody called Stephen Shakespeare. Stephen Shakespeare is not the real name. The real name is Stephen Kukwowski, who was born in Germany and who migrated to this country after the Second World War, who happens to be also associated with the Conservative Party in the past and even contested parliamentary elections in the 90s. He was also the Conservative Friends of Israel member. Now, can the public broadcaster of a country as big as BBC take an editorial decision based on the poll projection by an independent or a private agency? Is it unthinkable for a politicians to manipulate the poll projection of a privately owned company in order to secure undue coverage on the public broadcaster like the BBC? Is it unthinkable? So what I'm saying is that, can that argument hold water? What BBC is saying, should that be a credible argument? And that it doesn't end here. The clout Nigel Farage appears to have on the BBC is amazing. I mean, I'm somebody who has worked with the BBC for 12 years. I've never seen any politicians enjoying so much of clout, wielding so much of clout on the BBC management. That one presenter makes a comment about the inflammatory nature of his speech, and within hours that presenter is made to apologize.
He has said that this is now a matter of national security.
Nigel Farage, with his customary inflammatory language there at a Reform UK press conference, he declined to stand for a seat, but we will have more on what Farage is saying. Now, an apology. Earlier today, we heard live from Nigel Farage speaking at that election event we just saw. And when we came away from his live speech, I used language to describe it, which didn't meet the BBC's editorial standards on impartiality. I'd like to apologise to Mr Farage and viewers for this.
That's the fear of Nigel Farage in the BBC. Now, why is that fear? Why has Nigel Farage managed to generate that much of fear in the BBC? That should be the matter of concern for the voters. And why is BBC absolutely happy to ignore other political parties like George Galloway? You have to just watch George Galloway, what George Galloway is saying. He sums it up. You can hear the pain, you can see the pain in his voice when he says, come elections, Nigel Farage would be predicted to be the single largest party. Thanks to this media, the way the media, including the BBC, appear determined to project Nigel Farage as the future winner.
I'm certain that the resurgent Reform Party led by Nigel Farage is going to do very, very well. And there's still more than 3 weeks to go in the British general election. It's not inconceivable that he actually could be the top dog in the election running by the time we get to the 4th of July. Sections of the media are doing their best to promote that.
Because you have to understand, the amount of media coverage that Nigel Farage is getting, good way or bad way, doesn't matter. The fact that he's getting unprecedented coverage on media platforms, particularly on different platforms of the BBC, which have deep penetration into the British households. I think if Adolf Hitler was to get that kind of coverage today, he would also win elections. Or if Benjamin Netanyahu, a potential war criminal, if he was to given the same coverage on BBC platform, he would sweep elections in this country. So this is a moment of concern. If you are a voter in the UK, you should be concerned. And that's what I was saying in one of my videos earlier here, that George Galloway should have taken legal actions against the BBC based on these visible biases. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.